What's that? Okay. Well, the message today, title is Following God, Jacob Exchanges Laban for Canaan. Right, so following God, Jacob exchanges Laban for Canaan, part one. There'll be two. That's my idea for the chapter, and this is the first part of that, part one. Following God, Jacob exchanges Laban for Canaan. That's the title, but another title I had that just was too long. I'll just read this one anyway, so you kind of see where we're going here. With God's protection and at God's direction, Jacob exchanges Laban for Canaan. Right? With God's protection and at God's direction, he does this. Jacob exchanges Laban for Canaan. Okay. Let me just give a brief introduction, and then we'll pray and read the chapter. In this chapter, we see Jacob being commanded by God to return to Canaan. We see more about this dream that he had where God met him and told him this. And also we learn more about the situation with Laban and Jacob's family. We learn about those things in a discussion that is reported to us between Jacob and his two wives. Then Jacob and his family set out like a thief in the night to make their getaway from Laban on their way to Canaan. Laban is angered about this when he learns of it, and he pursues Jacob with hostility and anger, prepared to take back what once belonged to him, and feeling justified in his angry feelings due to the way he was most recently denied any opportunity to say his goodbyes. So he's got all kinds of anger and hostility, but he kind of feels justified because some of that anger really is a little bit justified, and so he uses it to justify everything, right? That's the way sinners usually do. Well, God intervenes for Jacob again in another dream, this time warning Laban to neither harm Jacob in any way nor attempt to stop his move to Canaan. Once Laban eventually overtakes Jacob's traveling caravan, he rebukes Jacob and charges him with public insult and theft, that he's insulted and stolen from Laban. His charges cannot be established, and so he must drop them. Jacob, for his part, then makes a counterclaim of injustice against Laban and cites as evidence God's previous intervention in Laban's scheming and planning, as well as Jacob's own previous success despite the most unfavorable of circumstances due to the unfair dealings of Laban. So not only did God intervene in your plan to come get me, but also he has given me success despite your every effort to make it hard on me. And that's his proof, that's his evidence of his counterclaim that Laban has been unjust. Well, the two agree to terms of peace, sort of, so long as neither of them will cross this boundary marker that they set up to do the other harm. They leave the place as enemies, but as no longer engaged in a current conflict, and with an agreement to no longer pursue the other party in vengeance or hostility. For Jacob, this means he's now free from the cheating and the hostility of Laban, and he's free to deal exclusively with what awaits him in Canaan. You might say out of the frying pan and into the fire, right? I mean, Esau's there waiting for him in Canaan, so far as he knows. And so, but he's at least got one down and one big one to go, right? And that's kind of where the chapter leaves us. And so that's the summary, my summary, I guess, as quickly as I can of this chapter. Why don't we pray, and then we'll read the chapter, and then we will consider the first half of things. So let's pray. Father in heaven, we come again, gather together under the name of Christ and in his care as his little ones, and we ask that you would take these truths and make them plain to us so that even little ones can understand and gain and profit from it. We want to have our confidence and our trust in you and our clarity about your ways increased as a result of this teaching today and our gathering and our time together. We want to have our hearts enlarged in love to you and for one another. Help us in this. I pray particularly also today just that you'd even give me the ability to get through this and help us all. In Christ's name we ask. Amen. Well, let me then read the chapter. I'll start in chapter 30, verse 43, just so we remember very specifically how this all starts. Thus the man increased greatly and had large flocks, female servants and male servants, and camels and donkeys. Now Jacob heard that the sons of Laban were saying, Jacob has taken away all that was our father's and gained, all that was our father's, and from what was our father's he has gained all his wealth. And Jacob saw that Laban did not regard him with favor as before. And then the Lord said to Jacob, return to the land of your fathers and to your kindred, and I will be with you. So Jacob sent and called Rachel and Leah into the field where his flock was, and said to them, I see that your father does not regard me with favor as he did before, but the God of my father has been with me. You know that I have served your father with all my strength, yet your father has cheated me and changed my wages 10 times. But God did not permit him to harm me. If he said, the spotted shall be your wages, then the flock all bore spotted. And if he said, the striped shall be your wages, then the flock all bore striped. Thus God has taken away the livestock of your father and given them to me. In the breeding season of the flock, I lifted up my eyes and saw in a dream that the goats that mated with the flock were striped, spotted, and mottled. Then the angel of God said to me in the dream, Jacob. And I said, here I am. And he said, lift up your eyes and see. All the goats that mate with the flock are striped, spotted, and mottled, for I have seen all that Laban is doing to you. I am the God of Bethel, where you anointed a pillar and made a vow to me. Now arise, go out from this land, and return to the land of your kindred. Then Rachel and Leah answered and said to him, is there any portion or inheritance left to us in our father's house? Are we not regarded by him as foreigners? For he has sold us, and he has indeed devoured our money. All the wealth that God has taken away from our father belongs to us and to our children. Now then, whatever God has said to you, do. So Jacob arose and set his sons and his wives on camels. He drove away all his livestock, all his property that he had gained, the livestock in his possession that he had acquired in Padan-aram, to go to the land of Canaan, to his father Isaac. Laban had gone to shear his sheep, and Rachel stole her father's household gods. And Jacob tricked Laban, the Aramean, by not telling him that he intended to flee. He fled with all that he had, and arose and crossed the Euphrates and set his face toward the hill country of Gilead. When it was told Laban on the 3rd day that Jacob had fled, he took his kinsman with him and pursued him for 7 days and followed close after him into the hill country of Gilead. But God came to Laban the Aramean in a dream by night and said to him, be careful not to say anything to Jacob, either good or bad. And Laban overtook Jacob. Now Jacob had pitched his tent in the hill country, and Laban with his kinsmen pitched tents in the hill country of Gilead. And Laban said to Jacob, what have you done that you have tricked me and driven away my daughters like captives of the sword? Why did you flee secretly and trick me and did not tell me, so that I might have sent you away with myrrh and songs, with tambourine and lyre? And why did you not permit me to kiss my sons and my daughters farewell? Now you have done foolishly. It is in my power to do you harm. But the God of your father spoke to me last night, saying, be careful not to say anything to Jacob, either good or bad. And now you have gone away because you longed greatly for your father's house. But why did you steal my gods? Jacob answered and said to Laban, because I was afraid, for I thought that you would take your daughters from me by force. Anyone with whom you, that's why he left, anyone with whom you find your God shall not live. In the presence of our kinsmen, point out what I have that is yours and take it. Now Jacob did not know that Rachel had stolen them. So Laban went into Jacob's tent and into Leah's tent and into the tent of the two female servants, but he did not find them. And he went out of Leah's tent and entered Rachel's. Now Rachel had taken the household gods and put them in the camel's saddle and sat on them. And Laban felt all about the tent, but did not find them. And she said to her father, let not my lord be angry that I cannot rise before you, for the way of women is upon me. So he searched, but did not find the household gods. Then Jacob became angry and berated Laban. Jacob said to Laban, what is my offense? What is my sin that you have hotly pursued me? For you have felt through all my goods. What have you found of all your household goods? See it here before my kinsmen and your kinsmen. Set it here before my kinsmen and your kinsmen, that they may decide between us two. These 20 years I have been with you. Your ewes and your female goats have not miscarried, and I have not eaten the rams of your flocks. What was torn by wild beasts I did not bring to you. I bore the loss of it myself. From my hand you required it, whether stolen by day or stolen by night. There I was. By day the heat consumed me, and the cold by night, and my sleep fled from my eyes. These 20 years I have been in your house. I served you 14 years for your 2 daughters, and 6 years for your flock, and you have changed my wages 10 times. If the God of my father, the God of Abraham and the fear of Isaac, had not been on my side, surely now you would have sent me away empty-handed. God saw my affliction and the labor of my hands and rebuked you last night. Then Laban answered and said to Jacob, the daughters are my daughters, the children are my children, the flocks are my flocks, and all that you see is mine. But what can I do this day for these my daughters, or for their children whom they have borne? Come now, let us make a covenant, you and I, and let it be a witness between you and me. So Jacob took a stone and set it up as a pillar, and Jacob said to his kinsmen, gather stones. And they took stones and made a heap, and they ate there by the heap. Laban called it Jegar Sahadutha, but Jacob called it Galid. Laban said, this heap is a witness between you and me today. Therefore he named it Galid. And Mizpah, for he said, the Lord watch between you and me when we are out of one another's sight. If you oppress my daughters, or if you take wives besides my daughters, although no one is with us, see, God is witness between you and me. Then Laban said to Jacob, see this heap and the pillar, which I have set between you and me. This heap is a witness, and the pillar is a witness, that I will not pass over this heap to you, and you will not pass over this heap and this pillar to me, to do harm. The God of Abraham and the God of Nahor, the God of their father, judge between us. So Jacob swore by the fear of his father Isaac. And Jacob offered a sacrifice in the hill country, and called his kinsmen to eat bread. And they ate bread and spent the night in the hill country. Early in the morning Laban arose and kissed his grandchildren and his daughters, and blessed them. Then Laban departed and returned home. Okay, that's a lot, right? That is a lot of material. That's why we break it up into two sections. So to begin with, we might just ask the question, why now, right? I mean, you remember chapter 30, verse 25? As soon as Rachel had borne Joseph, Jacob said to Laban, send me away that I may go to my own home and country. That's 6 years prior. He was ready to go, but he didn't. Then he entered into this agreement, hey, I'll serve you, and I'll get these certain animals that are not as good, generally not as desirable. They don't go for as much money on the market. Maybe their wool isn't as desirable for whatever reason, but I'll take these animals that are off-colored and, give you the ones that everyone seems to want, and those will be my wages, and we'll just do that for a while. And they've done it for 6 years. And Jacob has become very wealthy. He's got more than enough. He could have gone back already. But he didn't. Right? He didn't. So just to ask, why now? Why is it suddenly now the time to go? Why does he leave? And he leaves in a haste. What is going on? Why not 6 years ago? Why not 6 years from now? Why not, 6 years later? Why does it need to be now? So let's just consider that question a little bit. First of all, it was 6 years ago, again, that he first decided he wanted to return to Canaan after he finally had a son from the wife that he loved, right? I think I said last time that this favoritism for Joseph over his brothers, was from the day he was born. And for the other brothers, their sense of not really being loved and cherished by their father was from long before Joseph was born. I remember their mothers were having them so that he might love the mothers and all this stuff. And this is what life has been like for them. It's not been great. Once Rachel had a son, Jacob began to think about making something for himself, apart from what he had as a hired servant in Laban's house. He wanted to go back and to establish something in his own family name. His heart began to think about the future and the life that he wanted. Children have a way of doing that. He went to Laban, probably seeking a dowry for the two daughters. Typically, the money that if a man would pay money in exchange for the wives and give it to the father, it wasn't for the father to spend recklessly or however he wanted. He was to take that money and set it aside to take care of his daughters if something were to happen to their husband. If they were left widows, they could return to their father's house, and this is there set aside for them. Or it could often be done as, this was the price, but I love my daughter, and we give it to you to establish something and to be set off in a good way. So the expectation is, when he comes, send me away, send me home, it's not just let us go. They could go, but I've been serving you all this time and building up your house. I don't have anything. Let me go. Send us away. And Laban says, okay, I'd rather like you to keep working for me. This has been good, right? It's amazing. And so then Jacob has to say, well, okay, that's not going to work. He's not going to give us anything. So how about we set up a new arrangement? I'll still keep track of your flock and do well for you. And just the least of things I'll keep for myself, and that'll be my flock, and I'll have to keep both flocks. And that's what they agreed to, right? So Laban had no interest in giving the daughters away with their dowry to be sent on their way. Instead, he sought to keep Jacob around as a hired servant, since he knew God was blessing him on account of Jacob. So Jacob proposed to continue working for Laban as a shepherd, but that at the same time he would take the off-colored and therefore generally less desirable livestock for himself as a way to gain his own personal house and build up his house. Culturally, again, the expectation is Laban should have already set aside money to give for Jacob for this purpose of establishing his own family. But he's not done so. Instead, Jacob is left to proposing this sort of unusual situation. Laban agrees to this, but before Jacob has a chance to begin, Laban goes through the flock, distinguishing and separating the animals in such a way that makes it very unlikely that Jacob will ever end up with very much wealth, or that Laban's daughters will ever be very well taken care of. Jacob responds to this with a scheme of his own. He'll do everything he knows that can be done to ensure that the flocks produce as many off-colored animals as possible. And then he will also attempt to ensure that all the best and strongest animals are his with the off-colored coat, and that the lesser animals only would be those with the usually desirable colors. And therefore, those would belong to Laban according to the agreement. The result of all this is that God blesses Jacob because of Laban's double-handed and deceptive ways. And Jacob becomes very wealthy, despite the repeated attempts made by Laban to change the deal again and again in whatever ways seemed to Laban that would make it harder for Jacob to succeed and more likely for Laban to grow rich and to maintain his wealth. He just keeps changing the arrangement. 6 years into this arrangement, and Jacob has not only secured most of the numbers in the flocks, but he's also improved greatly upon those numbers and owns for himself large flocks, female servants and male servants, and camels and donkeys. Let's just look at this and remind ourselves of this. Verse 43 of chapter 30. Thus the man increased greatly and had large flocks, not a large flock, large flocks, female servants and male servants, and camels and donkeys. Now Jacob heard that the sons of Laban were saying, Jacob has what? Number one, he's taken away all that was our father's. You know, when 6 years ago, Dad had pretty big flocks, and now he doesn't have much, and Jacob's got massive flocks, just as big as Dad ever had. But more than that, and from what was our father's, he started out with things, these all belong to our father, and somehow has ended up that now he has gained all his wealth. He didn't have anything when he started. He was just looking after Dad's flocks, and now look at him. Dad hardly has any flocks, and he's got not just massive flocks, he's got great wealth. And they're ticked. What the inheritance they thought would have been theirs, that Laban was not willing to allow Jacob to have all this wealth that he'd acquired, now all of a sudden they don't have it. Jacob's got it again. 6 short years, right? And the newfound wealth that had been had now by their family is gone. And it's all Jacob's. And they're not happy at all. And so this is the situation. Laban and his sons resent this fact. They no longer view Jacob as an asset, but sort of like a usurper. Think of this. Like someone who has taken their strong and better position and cunningly removed them from it in order to have it himself. They're getting the idea that Jacob is a Jacob, right? That's what his name means. He's worn out his welcome, right, in their minds. They see him as, he came and brought all these great things, and they prospered, and that was good, and they were happy to have him around, but then 6 short years later, and somehow the tables have been turned, and he's got everything, and they've got almost nothing. And they're not happy with him. They see him as one who grasped at the heel in order to take what belonged to them. They say among themselves, Jacob has taken away all that was our father's, and from what was our father's, he has gained all this wealth. So I say this, I think there were 2 things we're asking why now, why leave now, right? We're still on this point as we're thinking about the story. 2 things I think were routinely going through Jacob's mind at this time. First, there was this desire to go home and to establish his family apart from these unfair and unjust ways of Laban, to just get away and out from under that, and to return to the land of his youth, to the land of promise, in order to raise his family, but especially to raise Joseph with Rachel. Right? This was his great desire. He wanted it. For 6 years now he's been wanting this. Second thing is there was this increasingly hostile and resentful attitudes of Laban and his other relatives who begrudged every success and victory that Jacob had, and who were growing increasingly restless about it. This is also worrisome to Jacob. So these things are kind of going through his mind all the time as this is getting more and more this way. So you think, well, that's why he left, of course. But there's one other important point that was also undoubtedly going through his mind as well. Namely, he has been in Padan Aram for 20 years now, and still has not heard from his mother that it's safe to return to Canaan. So this is a problem. Therefore, for all he knows, his brother Esau is still out for vengeance, and this is a real fear. Returning to Canaan is a daunting prospect, one to be avoided. And so there's also the fear of returning to Canaan, which has sort of anchored him in Padan Aram, sort of kept him still, despite his other desires, which you might say like a motor, are kind of driving him, constantly pushing him to say, let's get out of here, let's go, let's go. He's got 2 motors. One of the motors is the desire to get away from Laban and start something for himself where things can be fair and equitable and better, and he doesn't have to deal with all this. And the other is now he's kind of persona non grata, nobody wants him around, and they might do him harm or steal from him again. And so he wants to go, but this anchor's holding him there, namely he's afraid of Esau and what may happen. And so he's just kind of in limbo. So for 6 years, he's kind of remained here as he's seen their attitudes towards him change. And he's kind of begun to cool off a little bit, you might say, in his desire to just get away because of this. And so there is this fear of returning to Canaan. Now, into this situation, with these three ideas going around in Jacob's head, God appears to Jacob in a dream and tells him, among other things, return to the land of your fathers and to your kindred, and I will be with you. And so the Lord commands him to return now to the land of his fathers. Think of this. He's commanded to leave this flourishing program of wealth building and wealth preserving that he had in Haran. Right? I mean, he's got a good thing going. He's getting wealthy and rich. Great success. And God says, leave it. Go. I don't care about all your, preservation of wealth and you're building up a big house. You need to go back to the land of your fathers. Return to the land of his fathers, to the program of God in the promised land, to building up and establishing the program of God begun in his family in the land of Canaan, and no longer staying out there and just on his own program building up his own house. But there's also a bit of fear caused by this command. Not only is it a command to go and kind of put the things of God first, but also there's a bit of fear caused by the command in the idea of returning to your kindred. He says, return to the land of your fathers. Okay, that's all that God has been doing through them. But then, and to your kindred. And that is specifically, he only has one brother, and that's the one who he fled from, who wants to murder him and get revenge. So returning to Esau is the very thing he's been fearful of. And this command, therefore, requires, to obey this command, requires a good degree of trust and confidence in God's protection in order to actually leave and set out for Canaan. I mean, what's going to happen when he gets there? But with the fear, there's also a promise from God, right? So the command, get out and come back and begin on my program again. And don't forget, you're going to have to go back to your kindred too, and that causes fear. But with the fear, there's also the promise from God, but I will be with you, right? I'll be here. This is the same thing God had promised him earlier about his time in Padan Aram. It does not mean, evidently, that he won't be opposed, or that everything will go smoothly, or that Esau no longer wants to kill him. But it does mean that the schemes of those who oppose him will not succeed, because God will be with him. It means God will bless him and protect him and do him good. It means he doesn't have to fear. Just as God overthrew the unjust ways of Laban and has so far protected him from the hostile feelings of Laban's sons, so also God will protect him from the troubles awaiting him in Canaan among his kindred. In fact, the way the passage reads, things have changed for Jacob so that now, listen, Laban's face was no longer with him, but God has promised, I will be with you. Right? It's like he doesn't have these other things, but he's got God. And so the answer to the question, why now, is because in addition to the obvious reasons to leave, God has now added his own command to leave and also his own promise of protection if he goes. Jacob obeys, although he does it in such a way that gives Laban's family good reason to be angry. They still wanted his wealth after all, and he just absconded with it. And they were not given an opportunity to say goodbye, which is a real offense in their eyes. So, God, so why now? Well, God met him in a dream and commanded him to go. So how does Jacob then respond to this dream? So let's just look in our text here. Verse 3, Then the Lord said to Jacob, return to the land of your fathers and to your kindred, and I will be with you. We don't know that that was a dream yet until later on as Jacob describes it. But he responds to this command and this promise that he received in this dream a certain way. Several things. First, he called his wives out into the field where he was. Look at that. So verse 4, So Jacob sent and called Rachel and Leah into the field where his flock was. Evidently, while the flocks of Jacob and Laban have been kept separate, the camps of the two families have not been entirely separate. Does that make sense? Jacob kind of has his camp in the house that he's building and all the wealth, and all his flocks are out here, and Laban does not allow those flocks to mix, ever. And so Laban's flocks are 3 days' journey away or more. But the two camps, Laban's camp and Jacob's camp, are still, many times at least, still kind of together or near proximity to one another. And so when Jacob wants to speak about this plan to Rachel and to Leah, he does so by not going back to the camp to talk about it where they could be overheard and people might get word of their plan, but rather summoning them out into the field where he is so he can discuss this with them. So Jacob called his wives to him out in the field where he was. He wanted to ensure that they were with him and that they understood his reasons for leaving. I mean, it would not be good to take off and they're fighting him all the way and they want to stay. So he needs to secure their agreement in this, their assent to his plan. Also, he wanted to keep his plan a secret, free from listening ears, and unknown to Laban. Think of this. Jacob knows very well how a plan uttered in the privacy of a tent can be overheard and thereby overthrown. He knows that very well, right? He's been the culprit in that. You know, Mom heard something Dad said privately to Esau, and so now we've overthrown the whole thing. And so he's not willing to have his secret conversations in the camp, have them out in the field. That's the first way he responded. He called them out to him. Secondly, he responded in obedience by leaving immediately. Right? We could go down verse 17. So Jacob arose and set his sons and wives on camels. He drove away all his livestock, all his property that he had gained, the livestock in his possession that he had acquired in Paddan Aram, to go to the land of Canaan, his father Isaac. He did it immediately. This was good. He does not delay. He does not beg to go only part way or plead for the life that he has now, like Lot did. We've already been given a bad example of this. Someone saying, get out of here, and the person saying, oh, but, I don't really want to go, and let me just kind of go half as far as you say. And he doesn't do any of that. He's ready to go, and he goes. This is good. He does not ask to first spend his days in Haran until all his family duties are done and Laban is in the grave. Remember that invited would-be disciple who was asked by Jesus to follow him, but he begged off of it in order to instead spend his energies on important but lesser family responsibilities. He doesn't do that. He's ready to go. This is good. The third way he responds, he responds immediately in obedience, but he also responds hastily and without thought by not giving Laban any chance to say goodbye to his family. Despite what are probably reasonable fears that things might not go real well in that conversation, he doesn't give Laban a chance, and that was hasty. So then, considering all of that, let's work through this first half of the chapter a bit more, beginning with Jacob's first response in verse 4. So Jacob sent and called Rachel and Leah into the field where his flock was. So again, he calls out his two wives out into the field away from the camp. It's a very unlikely pair to call together. They've been at war for the last 6 years, right? Things are hostile, and he says, hey, Rachel, Leah, come see me. It's like, what could he possibly want? You imagine the discussion on the way out to the field? What's going to happen? What's this going to be like? These are sisters, but they're not very sisterly, right? Generally. They're not very warm. Unlikely pair to call together. Jacob is seeking to get them both to agree to go with him to Canaan without complaint and without objection. Good luck. So let's consider this little speech that he makes in verses 5 through 13. His speech is structured in 3 pairs. In each pairing, he lists an unjust action or attitude of Laban, and then he follows it by the action of God in overcoming Laban and in blessing Jacob. So he has 3 of those. Laban did this but God, Laban this but God, Laban this but God. And then he finishes it with this explanation of his dream that he had where the angel of God visited him and gave him a message. And that's kind of everything that he lays out for them. So let's just look at those then. The first pair in verse 5. In the understatement of the year, I see that your father does not regard me with favor as he did before. Like that's very much an understated observation. But the God of my father has been with me. So your father's face is not toward me or with me as it was before, but the God of my so your father's face has not been with me, but the God of my father has been with me. See that? He's been with me. Second pair. You know that I have served your father with all my strength, yet your father has cheated me and changed my wages 10 times. Right? So he's saying, I have been innocent in the matter. I've had good intentions for Laban in general, but my complaint against Laban is his continual treatment of me. He's cheated me and changed my wages 10 times. That's what he did. But God did not permit him to harm me. He tried to harm me, but God did not permit him to harm me. That's the second pair. Third pair, verses 8 and 9. If he said, the spotted shall be your wages, then all the flock bore spotted. And if he said, the striped shall be your wages, then all the flock bore striped. So what is Laban doing? Well, he keeps changing. He says one time, he says, well, that's going to be the spotted. And the next time he comes, well, it's going to be the striped. And then maybe next time it's going to be the mottled. Well, now it's going to be... He just keeps changing things. Every time he turns around, I don't know what the rules are, so how can I compete? Right? I spend all my time laboring to make sure all the flock is going to be a certain way and doing my best to do this, and Laban comes and says, well, we're going to do it this way now. And it's just constant. But every time you looked at things, you looked at, well, for the next 6 months, things are going to go good for Laban. I'm going to be missing out. This isn't going to work out at all. That's just the way it seems. But the reality is, no matter what Laban said, no matter how much I worked to make one thing best, God would allow me to succeed in that in some ways. Then Laban would come and say, well, from now on it's going to be this way, and I don't know what's going to happen now. But no matter what Laban said, it just worked out so that every single time, whatever Laban said my wages are going to be, that's what the flock produced. God did this. What does he say? Thus God has taken away the livestock of your father and given them to me. It's the only explanation. God has done this. And notice there's this term here I want to highlight. Thus God has taken away. When it says taken away, that's not bad, but the word is a lot more colorful than that. You might say he is rescued, or he's delivered, or he's plundered away. So this is the word used in Exodus by God when he talks about what he's going to do to the Egyptians. He's going to make it such that they're going to give you all their wealth, and you've plundered them, and thus you will have plundered the Egyptians. Same word. But usually the word is not used as in a negative way, like what you do to someone, you plunder away from them, but rather it's usually used in terms of the light of the person who profits from it, the one who is rescued. God delivers the people. Let me just turn to one passage there, which I think is a really good example and relevant for our passage today. Psalm 35:10, all my bones shall say, O Lord, who is like you, delivering or rescuing the poor from him who is too strong for him, the poor and needy from him who robs him. So if we're thinking about Jacob, you might think of his situation as God is rescuing him, delivering him, snatching him away from the clutches of Laban. But the way Jacob describes it here, God was plundering away from Laban all the riches that Laban meant to rob Jacob of. God was not letting them have them. Laban was being plundered by God. The flock was being delivered out of Laban's hands. It's as though God was personally prying Laban's fingers off of these individual sheep and goats to give them to Jacob. Whatever it was, Laban said, that's mine. God pried the fingers off a couple months at a time, and it was Jacob's. Again and again and again. And the way this worked out, it's rather funny if you think about it. I mean, say you go out you go out to buy a car or something, and you see all these vehicles, and you go online maybe and you look at all these reviews, and this car is more reliable than that one, and this, and this is the price, this seems to be the best buy, and you're like, okay, I'm going to get that. And you go to buy it, and you buy it, and then like the next day you look on the same website, and it's like all the reviews are negative, and everything's bad, and it's not reliable, and you think, what? I did my research, this should have been a good car. Everyone I talked to said the car was great, and then the next week they have all broken down. How does this happen? And now you've got all these car repairs, and you got all these bills, and things are not going well. So you say, well, the next time I buy a car, I'm going to use a different, method of research or something. And you decide, and so you spend all your time researching this, and now you've decided this other car will be much better, and now you buy that car. And the same thing happens. A month in, and the car's a lemon. And everyone else who has that kind of, it just went bad. And no matter what, you've done all your diligence, but it just keeps working out in such a way that you keep choosing wrong. It seems like you've chosen right, but it's not what's worked out. And this is the way God is doing to Laban. Every time he sees what's happening, he says, I'm going to change the deal. This is what I want now. And the next time he goes to collect, it's all different. He can't win. And this is what God has done. Now, then Jacob in verse 10 begins to explain this dream that he had when God commanded him to leave. Just in the breeding season of the flock, verse 10, I lifted up my eyes and saw in a dream that the goats that mated with the flock were striped, spotted, and mottled. It's kind of a strange thing to dream. Very strange thing to dream. Then the angel of God said to me in the dream, Jacob, and I said, here I am. And he said, now the angel explains the purposes of this. He says, lift up your eyes and see, all the goats that mate with the flock are striped, spotted, and mottled. In other words, the reality is the flock keeps producing these certain things, which were initially, remember in their agreement, all supposed to belong to Jacob. So in other words, in the vision, he's seeing that what's happening is the flocks are producing in such a way that everything, he gets it all. He says, why is this the case? For I have seen all that Laban is doing to you. For I have seen all that Laban is doing to you. So first of all, there's this vision of the flock, and then secondly, the vision of the flock is explained by the angel of the Lord as indicating that God was protecting and defending Jacob from Laban, right? That's what this means. You've been out there serving him this way, and I've been protecting you and defending you and prospering you against all of Laban's scheming. And then there's this next statement, which is quite amazing. Let's go back one other text. I think this will be helpful. Let's go to Genesis 28 and look at verse 13. Last time Jacob had a vision or a dream or anything like this. Verse 13, Genesis 28:13. And behold, the Lord stood above it and said, this is this ladder or the stairway to heaven, I am the Lord, the God of Abraham your father, and the God of Isaac. I am the Lord, I am Yahweh, I am the God of Abraham your father, and the God of Isaac. Now, in Genesis chapter 31, what does God say? Verse 13, I am the God of Bethel. The God of Bethel. He gives a place name. I mean, God doesn't usually do that. I'm the God of this place. But he specifically names himself that, the God of Bethel, for a very specific reason. What does he say? Where you anointed a pillar and made a vow to me. You see, I'm the God who appeared to you there and said I'd protect you and bless you and be with you. And then remember what you said to me? You erected this pillar and you made a vow, and you said you would come worship me in this place if I were to bring you back here. And I'm telling you, it's time to go back. It's time to fulfill your vow and honor your oath. Get busy with God's program back in the land. Don't keep hesitating in Padan-Aram due to your complacency of success. You've succeeded so well, you just things are good here. Or the paralyzation of fear about your brother. You need to get back. You made me a vow. You need to go. Right? It's not just, well, God commanded him. God commanded him and then kind of reminded him, look, imagine, think of it this way. God is coming to him and saying, look, it's time to go home and get back on to things like we started. I've protected you, I've provided for you, I've defended you this whole time. People have tried to do you bad, to do ill to you, to take advantage of you, to cheat you, but I didn't let it happen. Continually I protected you and preserved you. And now I'm telling you, you made me a vow that if I would do these things, you would come back and you'd worship me in this place. It's time to fulfill your vow. It's essentially what he's been told here by God. Kind of an uncomfortable place to be in, right? You better go. What happens if he says no? Probably no more protection from God. You're telling God, I will not fulfill my vow to you. I will not honor you. I will not worship you. You won't be my God. I'm going to stay here. That's a dangerous thing to do because here isn't all of that very much of a safe place for you. The only reason things have gone well for you, or anyone else for that matter, in this place is because God has decided to bless you. So, this is what happens. This is the vision that he receives, the dream that he has. So then let's look at verses 14 and 16 and consider the response of his two wives, this unlikely pair who he's hoping to be in agreement on this. Now, let me stop for a second. This is incredible. Until now, I would suspect that all of us would describe the experience of Leah and the experience of Rachel very differently. We would say like they almost have nothing in common, right? Leah and Rachel, their lives for the last 14 years, or at least, 13 years since they've been married, for sure, have been very different. Very, very different. And they have been. And yet, there are such similarities. They speak with one voice about the way their father has treated them. Look at this. Then Rachel and Leah answered and said to him, is there any portion or inheritance left to us in our father's house? There's nothing left to us in our father's house. Which only makes sense, again, if what was typically what the bride price would be was left as either as a dowry initially or was set aside in case something would happen that they would need it. And so nothing is left to us in our father's house, they say. That's amazing. We are regarded by him as foreigners. You think, what do you mean as foreigners? He's treating you like you're just some foreign slave or servant or something? Yeah, that's what they're saying. What do they mean? For he has sold us. Right? He basically sold us. You think, well, that's not really fair. Those bride prices aren't really a sale. It's something that he gets and then it's kind of for you. Oh no, not for Laban. He has sold us and has devoured our money. They see it as their money because it was for them, but he's squandered it all. He's devoured it. He's consumed it. Which is like treating them like foreigners. The money was given or the service was rendered and there was no storing up for his children. He just treated them like they were foreigners, not belonging to him at all. What did he care? And he's devoured. He's spent it foolishly. So there's nothing left for them. So the idea of leaving is not a big... There's nothing they're leaving. If they were to say, no, Jacob, you go, we're going to stay with Laban, there's nothing for them there. Imagine, suppose it was that they had this sharp disagreement with Jacob, if Laban was doing right. Sharp disagreement with Jacob, and Jacob sent them away with the divorce. And Jacob went back home. What would they have? Well, they would have what Jacob had built up in Laban's house for them to have, their money. They would have the wealth that was supposed to have belonged to Laban. They would have had all that. But they didn't. Didn't have any of it. What was for 14 years he served Laban. And what were the results for Laban's daughters? Nothing. He squandered it all. He didn't do anything for him. This is incredible for his daughters. He squandered it all. We're regarded by him as foreigners. He has sold us and has indeed devoured our money. That's such a colorful way of saying it, isn't it? He's devoured our money. He ate it all. I mean, maybe he did. I don't know. Maybe he literally, in a sense, ate it and then he spent it all on food and parties and festivities and feasting. Very, very commonly done, right? People outspend their income. Now, all the wealth, and what else do they say? All the wealth that God has taken away from our father belongs to us and to our children. And this is just a factual statement. God took all the wealth that was Laban's and gave it to Jacob. He's their husband. So all that God took away, it's ours. Like, why would we stay? There's nothing, not only is there nothing for us there, but all that our father, that God did in fact take away from our father, he didn't just give it to somewhere else. He actually gave it to us. We've got it because you have it. We're your wives. It belongs to us. Now then, whatever God has said to you, do. You just do that. Whatever it is God's telling you to do, we're with you. Like, we're not going to take Laban's side at all. He has treated us very poorly. He's given us not a thought. Treated us like foreigners. He's neglected entirely his duty as a father, as a father-in-law, as a grandfather. We don't really care to have anything to do with him. We're ready to go. And so that's what happens. So then what happens next? We read about the obedient but also the misguided actions of Jacob's family. They're obedient insofar as they take God at His word and they mean to follow through and do it. They're misguided in that the way they go about it wasn't the best. They could have done it better. There's not, many times when God gives us a command, there's not only one command He wants us to think about, right? I mean, it's like you sometimes get this with young converts. They're excited many times about, not just young converts, young Christians in general a lot of times. They are excited to share the faith, and that is very good, and we want to do that and emphasize that. But they maybe do it in ways, there sure are a lot better ways they could be doing things. You know, this sort of thing at times. They do it in ways that are maybe they're hostile. They get into arguments with people. You see this with young Christians who try to defend the faith. They get into all the wrong arguments with people, right? It's like it's not just be talking to people about the gospel. We're supposed to live with them in a certain way. We're supposed to be at peace with people. We're supposed to love people. We're supposed to all this kind of thing. And it's not just young Christians that fall prey to this. All of us as believers, right? We tend to at times focus on one command at the expense of others. And here is Jacob. We're going to get out of here, but he's not thinking about his obligations that are legitimate obligations to Laban. Or maybe he's thinking about them, I probably should do this, but he imagines how that conversation will go and the difficulties with it. And how before Laban was not willing to let them go. And how now if he says this, maybe they don't make it out with the flocks and the herds. And maybe the things are just seized and they leave with nothing. And he's afraid about doing that, and so he refuses to even go there and entertain that idea. He just leaves. But it's worse than that. Rachel. So you have, first of all, this immediate obedience. Jacob arose and set his sons and his wives on camels. And he drove away all his livestock and his property that he had gained, and the livestock in his possession that he had acquired in Paddan Aram, to go to the land of his father Isaac. Laban had gone to shear his sheep, so he wasn't there at the time. This was a few days' chore that needed to take place. And while he was gone, Rachel went in and stole her father's household gods, which I can interpret one of two ways. Either it was very petty retribution. It's like, not only are you going to lose everything else, watch this. I'm so incensed against him. While he's gone, those puny gods that he's been serving and worshiping that are worthless, that aren't delivering him from anything, I'm going to take them, and he's not even going to have them. He's going to lose everything, which is that's no way to be, right? But that's maybe what she did. That's one of only two ways I can read it, and I think it's very possible that she did this. Because we never get any sense that she's been praying to them or worshiping them or anything like that. We don't see that later. I don't think she really believed in them necessarily. But the other possibility is that she did. She kind of had a little confidence in God, but not a lot of confidence in God. And she wanted to kind of hedge her bets and just make sure that she covered all her bases. And so she's going to go in obedience to this God, but she's going to bring these other gods too, just in case things aren't working out real well. She's got extra recourse. And so she sneaks off and steals these gods. So one way or the other, either way, it's not a good thing for Rachel. And it is theft. And Laban was right about that. He just couldn't prove it. But I mean, he really was done wrong. And someone did in fact steal his gods. You might say, well, what good are your gods if someone can steal them? How good are they going to be to you if they can be stolen? I mean, how powerful are they? Right? This is quite a thing, serve a God who somebody could just steal when you're not looking. I mean, it's not good. How's he going to deliver you from something else that person wants to do, right? He can't even help himself. So this is the thing. But he in fact was stolen from, and he also was wronged in that he wasn't allowed to say goodbye. And the text just doesn't say that Laban counted it a personal offense and an insult in the public eye that he was not allowed to say goodbye. The text says something far greater than that. The Hebrew says that Jacob stole the heart of Laban. He stole his heart. For all his failures as a father, and there are many, I mean, it's like all we read about, even he loved his children, which is one of the reasons, like when I counsel like college students and people that are younger and they're trying to out on their own, they're trying to sort out like how they relate to their parents and stuff, even though they disagree about this and that and the other 1,000 things. It's like you still got to find a way to honor them. Like it matters. You're still commanded to do that. There are ways that you can respond to them. You might think, oh, I'm just responding in kind, which you're not just justified to do anyway. But you might think, well, what would they care? They obviously don't care about this, that, and the other. That's not true. They deserve to be honored and obeyed, right? Sought after for their counsel. These things are important. It stole his heart. You wouldn't think Laban would care. You think he'd say, good riddance, except I want all my money back and my flocks and stuff. But he doesn't. He stole his heart. This was the big thing. Rachel stole her father's household gods, and Jacob stole his heart. Jacob stole the heart of Laban the Aramean by not telling him that he intended to flee. And he fled with all that he had and arose and crossed the Euphrates and set his face toward the hill country of Gilead. When it was told Laban on the third day that Jacob had fled, he took his kinsman with him and pursued him for 7 days and followed close after him into the hill country of Gilead. So what do you think? So he flees, he steals away. Now, where does he flee to? It says he set his face, he fled with all that he had and arose and crossed the Euphrates and set his face toward the hill country of Gilead. Now, Gilead, you might think of it, and this is fairly, I think it's a fair description of it, it's a fair way to think of it, as kind of a boundary, kind of the edge of the promised land compared to what was not the promised land, kind of out here towards Padan Aram and Aramea and all this area. And so he sets his face towards the country of Gilead, which I think just tells us this, that he's not yet necessarily thinking about getting to the promised land or about what awaits him there. He's just thinking about, I've got to get away from Laban. He doesn't set his heart on Salem. He doesn't set his heart on somewhere like that or Bethel, returning there. He knows he's got to get to Bethel to fulfill the oath, but right now he's content just to set his sights as far as Gilead and get there, get away from Laban, get out of one issue, get one down, and then kind of gather himself together and think about what lies ahead. And so he sets his face simply as far as the hill country of Gilead. Now, we're not going to go on any further in the text, but I want to just make some applications. I have 4 things. First of all, considering Laban, those who fail in their duty to God, who abuse and cheat others, and who are dishonest people, find themselves, not just with God opposing them, but in God opposing them, they find themselves alone and without in the end. They find themselves alone and without in the end, and without the help of God. I'll just read 3 texts on this that I think will be helpful. Psalm 34. Psalm 34, verses 15 and 16. The eyes of the Lord are toward the righteous, and His ears are toward their cry. The face of the Lord is against those who do evil, to cut off the memory of them from the earth. Right? Those who do evil are left alone, they're left without the help of God. He is, what does it say? He sets His face against those who do evil, to cut off the memory of them from the earth. Then Proverbs chapter 2, verse 22. Next page. But the wicked will be cut off from the land, and the treacherous will be rooted out of it. The wicked will be cut off from the land, and the treacherous will be rooted out of it. It reminds me of the other text I want to look at. Why I think of it is because looking at these texts is something Jesus says in Matthew 23 that isn't exactly the same. But let's look at this. Matthew 23, verses 37 and 38. This is Jesus speaking about Jerusalem. He says, "O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the city that kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to it, how often would I have gathered your children together as a hen gathers her brood under her wings, and you would not." Right, like God saying, I would have treated you so well, but you just wouldn't. You were unwilling to come to me, to deal with me directly. And honestly, He says, see, your house is left to you desolate. You've got nothing. There's such a similarity there. Right? It could have been gone so well for you, but instead your house is left for you desolate. And I think of Jacob, or of Laban this way, like things could have been well for him. If he'd have blessed Jacob and loved Jacob, and just if his attitude was wanting to do Jacob well, and to bless Jacob, to do him good, God would have continued to bless Laban for Jacob's sake. And Laban would have had tons, all this stuff. It would have been gone well for him. But instead, like he's unwilling to live at peace with Jacob. His mind is set only on the wealth, only on possessions, and he's left desolate. He goes back empty-handed. It's incredible. God plundered him. So that's the first thing. Those who fail in their duty to God, those who abuse and cheat others, and who are dishonest people will find themselves alone and without in the end, and most importantly, without the help of God. Second thing, second application, when we are wronged by others, mistreated by others, we have to give place to God and act peaceably amidst the conflict, and God will take up for us. We see that with Jacob. Right? I mean, he's saying, I served him with all my strength, and this is what he's done to me. But God didn't allow him to harm me. God was with me. Right? And you can imagine if he'd have set himself instead to somehow steal, right? He's able to tell Laban later, like, look, when an animal died at the hand of some wild animal, I bore the loss of it myself. When something was stolen, whether it was by day or by night, it didn't matter whether it was probably my fault or maybe one of your sons took it. I bore it myself. I didn't make you pay for the loss of that thing. I suffered it myself. I did everything I could to be upright, to treat you well. I knew how you were treating me. I resented it, but I didn't let it rise, that resentment or that acknowledgement that I was being wronged by you, to rise to the level of me retaliating against you. I didn't do that. He can say that. Which is, I think, one of the main reasons why he had God's help. God said, look, I see what he's doing, and so therefore I have done this. Which reminds me of Romans 12, 14 through 21. I'll read this. Bless those who persecute you, bless and do not curse them. Rejoice with those who rejoice, weep with those who weep. Live in harmony with one another. Do not be haughty, but associate with the lowly. Never be conceited. Repay no one evil for evil, but give thought to do what is honorable in the sight of all. If possible, so far as it depends on you, live peaceably with all. Beloved, never avenge yourselves, but leave it to the wrath of God, but rather give place to God, to the wrath of God. For it is written, vengeance is mine, I will repay, says the Lord. To the contrary, if your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he is thirsty, give him something to drink. For by so doing you will heap burning coals on his head. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. This was, in many respects, the life of Jacob during these 6 years. Serving him faithfully. Even though he knew Laban was trying to cheat him, God kept working it out so that Jacob was the one coming out ahead. This wasn't Jacob stealing from Laban. This was God plundering Laban. There's a big difference. And so this is what we see in terms of when you give place to God, like God works it out, right? Don't say, well, he's mistreating me, so therefore I'm going to get back at him. Just let God do that. God will take care of that work. And what you find is God worked it out better than Jacob ever could. We have to give place to God and act peaceably amidst conflict, and then God will take up for us. Third application. God expects us to repay our vows to Him. This one's a little bit uncomfortable if you think about it. God expects us to repay our vows to Him. He does not forget our words to Him even 20 years later. Right? Any slowness in fulfilling the vow, God marks it down. He sees that too. He says, listen, Jacob, it's time. I've done... He said, if you'll do this, then I'll do that. Well, I've kept my end of the bargain. Now it's your turn. God confronts him with that. So the only application I can make is God confronts us with that. He expects those vows, those things that you've told God, I will do this. He expects you to do it. That's really a thing. You can't just say, well, I'm forgiven in Jesus. Like, that might be true, but be very careful. God expects you to fulfill your vow. He actually expected Jacob to leave everything and to move and to establish a place of worship at Bethel and to commit to God alone, being his God from now on, because he vowed God he would do that. That was the expectation. God even used a different name with him. I'm the God of Bethel. I mean, is there some place you've made some vow to God, some situation during which you made some vow to the Lord? If God were to come to you and said, I'm the God of that situation, remember? Fulfill your vow. This is the way he's talked to by the angel of the Lord in this dream. So let me look at 3 passages quickly just to underscore this for us. Deuteronomy 23, verses 21 through 23. Deuteronomy 23, 21 through 23. This is admittedly from the Old Covenant law, but here it is. If you make a vow to the Lord your God, you shall not delay fulfilling it. For the Lord your God will surely require it of you, and you will be guilty of sin. But if you refrain from vowing, you'll not be guilty of sin. So you made a vow. God takes the vow seriously. You see that? If you had not vowed it, then not giving it wouldn't have been sin. But you vowed it, and now, because you've sworn an oath and made a vow to God, there's a new category of things that can be sin for you. So if you say, God, I promise, I make a vow to you, if you deliver me from this thing, I will sell the car and give all the proceeds to missions, or whatever you may say. Okay. Now, that means then, if God does that, now there's a new thing that can be sin for you, which could never have been sin before. Before, if you had not done that, it couldn't have been counted against you as transgression of some sin. But now, because you've categorized it as something you owe to God, if you fail to do it, that's a sin. And this is what he's saying. If you had refrained from vowing, you would not have been guilty of sin. But you shall be careful to do what has passed your lips. For you have voluntarily vowed to the Lord your God what you have promised with your mouth. It's a big deal. Big deal. No wonder then. Think of this. This is, in light of this is a curious, it's not curious, it's telling. Something that James says in James chapter 5, verses 11 and 12. Here's verse 11. Behold, we consider those blessed who remain steadfast. You have heard the steadfastness of Job and have seen the purpose of the Lord, how the Lord is compassionate and merciful. So it's just on the heels of God is so, things were hard, but he endured and God was merciful to him. This is the kind of God we serve. But above all, my brothers, do not swear. Listen to this. Either by heaven or by earth or by any other oath, but let your yes be yes and your no be no, so that you may not fall under condemnation. It's just such a strange thing to follow on the heels of the great mercy and goodness of God and His good purposes for us. But above everything, don't swear an oath to God. Just let your yes be yes and your no be no, because that way you won't fall under condemnation. In other words, if you're swearing all these oaths all the time to God, making all these promises, then what happens when you fail to do them? Well, there's consequences for that. And He would have you avoid those things. James would like it to be such in your life for this to be true. If you are enduring hardship from the hand of God, that it's just because of God's good purposes and kindness toward you and His intentions to bring this thing about just for your good, rather than God's disciplining you for your failure to fulfill an oath. And this is the relative condemnation you're enduring because of your rashness and your unwillingness to follow through. He doesn't want that for you. Which means then, how else to understand that as a believer, except that even though I'm covered with the blood of Christ, and I don't have to answer for my sins in a judicial sense, if I'm making vows and not keeping them and committing sins against God in that way, God won't forget that. God will bring that back upon me in some way. It won't be hellfire. It won't be abandonment. I'm still His child. But just as a parent, like when my child makes a promise to another, I make them fulfill it. And if they don't, there are consequences for it. Because they need to learn the truth, how much truthfulness matters. Last text on this, and we'll go on to our last point then of application after that. I keep skipping the book because it's so small. Malachi chapter 1 and verse 14. Listen to the way that God describes those who promise to offer one thing and then offer another. Cursed be the cheat who has a male in his flock and vows it, and yet sacrifices to the Lord what is blemished. For I am a great king, says the Lord of hosts, and my name will be feared among the nations. Right? It's a dishonor. We all know that to be true. Like, it's a dishonor. Not only is it a lie on your part and a failure to do what you said to do, you've failed in your words. You've not lived up to the measure of your words. But it's also an insult to the person that you fail. It wasn't important enough. They could be disregarded. You can make oaths and promises to them that you don't need to repay. We demand this of our politicians, right? Or we try to. They're running for office and I'll do this, and I'll do this, and I'll do this, and I'll do this. And they get in office, and what do we all bemoan? They fail to do those things. They don't even try, many of them. I mean, it's like typically when a president comes up to be reelected, if you can look at all the things he ran on in the first time he ran, if you could say, well, I mean, did he do a couple of them? And if he did a couple of them, we say success. It's incredible. It's that way. Well, Christians aren't to be like that, right? Well, they said all these things, and so, of the 30 things they promised, if they do a couple of them, then that'd be all right. And God doesn't accept that. He's a great king, and He will be feared among the nations. How does God secure that fear? Well, you can secure that fear a couple ways. You can secure that fear by just people in the nation seeing people who serve you being so reverent in their regard to you. But if those people won't regard you, then the nations can fear you by they watch what happens when people make promises to you and they don't keep them. What happens? That's another way God can be feared. And God does both things in the world. Our vows, our oaths, our promises matter. Okay, all of those things are not all negative, but in a sense, kind of negative. First, I've said, look, those who fail in their duty to God, abuse and cheat others, dishonest people will find themselves alone and without and apart from the help of God. That's one application. Secondly, we have to give place to God and act peaceably, or God won't act for us. He won't rescue us and deliver us. That's something we need to do. Something at stake there. Third, God expects us to repay our vows to Him. He doesn't forget our words to Him, even 20 years later. And then last, and this is maybe the most encouraging, most hopeful, the deceptive people, the dishonest people, the self-centered people, like Jacob has been so much of his life, may yet repent toward God and find a lifelong protector and a lover of their soul in God. Right? They could repent toward God, and when they do, find a lifelong protector for them and a lover of their soul. Just 3 texts on this too, and we'll close. Psalm 32 and verse 5. We've been a lot in Psalms 30s today. Psalm 32 and verse 5. You don't need to turn there, but I'm turning there to give you time if you want. So, I acknowledged, again, I'm saying the deceptive, dishonest, self-centered people, like all of us were, and like Jacob certainly had been, may yet repent toward God and find a lifelong protector and lover of their souls. Psalm 32:5. I acknowledged my sin to you, and I did not cover my iniquity. I said, I will confess my transgressions to the Lord, and you forgave the iniquity of my sin. I confessed it, and you forgave it. Simple as that. What a thing. Then Ezekiel, very famously, Ezekiel 33 and verse 11. Say to them, here's God's message to a people. Say to them, as I live, declares the Lord God, I have no pleasure in the death of the wicked, but that the wicked turn from his way and live. Turn back from your evil ways, for why will you die, O house of Israel? Right? Turn back. He's not just against the life you're living, He's offering you something in exchange. If you'd repent, if you just turn. Why persist in evil? Why persist in wickedness? And then the last one, in terms of just finding a protector for us and a lover of our soul, I think of John 10:10. The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I came that they may have life and have it abundantly. But that's the offer, right? An abundant life and all that may mean. It's ours in Christ. We'll find a lover of our soul, a protector for life. Well, those are the applications I have just in this. Again, some of them were negative, but then this last one, in terms of thinking about Jacob and how far he's come and how much he's changed, is just that reality that he who was stealing and conniving and taking from people before, now, like, he repented toward God, he in a sense gave God a chance, said, if you'll do these things for me, I'm with you. I'm going to follow you and serve you. And he goes out there to Paddan Aram, and he does it. And God protected him and is bringing him back. It's wonderful. God undertook for him. Well, are there questions or comments? The message today.